All right, the meeting's recording, Sarah.
All right, thank you. All right, I'd like to call to order the March 9th meeting of the Land Use Review Board. Janet is absent today, so I will be chairing the meeting. Sarah Hatt, present. Brooke,
Brooke Dingledine, present.
Kirsten,
Kirsten Sultan, board member present.
and Alex.
Alex Weinhagen. Good afternoon, everyone.
All right, do we have any agenda updates or modifications needed?
None for me.
All right, hearing none, we'll move to opportunity for public comment on non-agenda items. I see we have several members of the public joining us today, including Paul Ponner here from the city of South Burlington in person. Are there any members of the public wishing to give comment on things not on the agenda? I see no hands raised. So we continue on. We can always come back to that. Consent agenda items, minutes of February 26th and March 2nd. So everybody had a chance to review them. Kirsten,
I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes of February 26th, 2026 and March 2nd, 2026, subject to any revisions as, received or noted or otherwise discussed here.
Brooke.
I'll second the motion.
All right, any changes, modifications, corrections? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Looks like that is unanimous. All right, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but it does appear that our friends from Chittenden County Regional Planning have joined us. Taylor, is your team here if we move into the next one? All right, I see a head nod. With that, I'll turn over to CCRPC.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. First off, just want to thank the board again for our meeting last Monday. We're feeling very confident with all your guidance about our map. I know we're kind of, we've said it 1,000 times, building the plane while we're flying it. So I appreciate the flexibility as we continue to do that. We're back to talk to you today just about one geographic area, and it's a geographic area that we've already talked about, which is that Williston Road corridor. During our conversation last week, we all admitted to ourselves it was hard to put a lot of this corridor in one of the categories outlined in the statute. The board encouraged the RPC to maybe get a little bit more granular to see if there were different ways we could break up different parts of this geography, perhaps into a planned growth area versus an enterprise area, maybe a transition area. And, in the Williston side of the border, we attempted to do that. From our perspective, it's much easier just to pull out the industrial areas and make them enterprise in Williston, and to have those areas where residential uses are allowed to have those remain PGA. So that's our plan. It was tough to go more granular than that, even with their design review district. But we still have questions about the South Burlington side of the border. And so that's what we've tried to outline here in the memo. And so that first page of the memo, it's really about two questions for us related to PGA. That definition of PGA, does this area that we're mapping here, specifically kind of east of Kennedy, constitute a high density existing settlement and future growth areas with high concentrations of population, housing, and employment as appropriate to each region or town? And does the municipal plan indicate this area is intended for high density residential and mixed use development? And as we've talked about before, Chittenden County's or RPC is really taking an expansive view of that in terms of like this larger geography within South Burlington does compose all of these elements. It is an employment center. It is an area that's planned for high density development. But when you get down to specific land use areas along Kimball Avenue, along Williston Road, there are areas where the city does not allow some residential uses. And so trying to understand if the board's comfortable with that more expansive interpretation or if we need to go more narrow. In your memo, you also have in my memo, there we go. In your memo, you also have two different scenarios. One is just keeping the entire area PGA if we're comfortable with that more expansive definition or interpretation of PGA. And the other scenario is looking at enterprise really throughout, but with islands of PGA where residential uses are allowed within this greater geography. We felt like that was still the best fit, PGA and those islands, because those areas are served by water and wastewater. They are connected in terms of bike ped network. They do allow for pretty dense residential growth there. And then we bring up a couple of kind of considerations for the board, not trying to make an argument here regarding accommodations, the interpretation of how accommodations and how lodging has been interpreted by Act 250 in the past in terms of the definition of dwelling, and just some considerations about Tier 1A and trying to keep eligibility and us seeing that as a more positive thing. So with that longer than needed preamble, does the board have any comments or questions about the memo? Would you folks like to look at the map? Where would you like to start the conversation?
I was gonna say, Taylor, I think I've enabled you, so if you want to share screens, we don't necessarily need to do that right now. Paul, do you wish to say anything right now? Or?
Not up front. I'm here as a resource if board members have any questions, but not up front.
Thoughts from the board? Kirsten?
Sarah, I apologize. Who's that in the room with you? I'm sorry.
Paul Connor is the
Oh.
Director of Planning for South Burlington.
Yeah. Thank you.
Alex?
So thanks, Taylor, for giving us some more information. I'm not inclined to move in the direction of islands of planned growth area that are shown in the scenario 2 of your memo. I don't think that's the right way to tackle this issue. So just to be clear, I'm happy to change my mind as always, but that's just where I'm starting the conversation. I guess I would be interested to hear from Paul regarding the city's plans for the Williston Road corridor, because the two residential neighborhoods that seem to be driving some of the issue here, at least as they're shown in your memo, those are accessed from Williston Road, I think. And I wonder if there's a difference in the city's planning for the Williston Road corridor versus the areas south of Kimball Ave that include, very large parcels of industrial development.
I'm happy to answer that if you want me to answer it up front, or if you want to get other board thoughts, whatever you want to do. I'm happy to be here as a resource, however you'd like to go about doing that. But I know the question if you want to say.
Why don't we see if there's anything more from board members before we venture into explanations? Are there any other thoughts, or would people like to have Paul address that right now? Kirsten?
Well, I guess I'll just say I can understand the challenge of looking at it at this more granular level, and it's sort of like this patchwork effect, and I am interested to hear what Paul would have to say and other board members.
Brooke, do you have any thoughts at this point, or? All right.
I'd like to continue listening to the discussion.
All right, I'm happy to have Paul address it. I will say that the way that I'm taking a look at this PGA area is perhaps a little bit differently. I think just given the scale, and Shannon County is at a different scale than some of the other PGA areas that we have had, where I can understand looking at that technology park area along Kimball Drive as being potentially a single use area. But I think what I took from the memo was that there are plans that could have residential elements to that in the future. That is an area that has definitely been metamorphosized over the years in terms of some of the thinking with it, and it's become more inclusive. So taking a look at, you are right, Alex, I think there's the pocket of residential more along Wilson Road, but is it a larger context that has elements of some single use, some residential use, and does the whole thing meet the definition of PGA plan for mixed use in totality. In separate areas, it might not, but in totality, it might. But those are just some of my ruminations on it. But Paul, why don't you?
Sure. So thank you for the question. So let me take a slightly bigger geography and then I'll narrow in. When the Chittenden County RPC map was in front of you back in December, some of the conversation was about this area and some of the conversation was about south of the interstate in what is known as Meadowland Business Park. And you can see just a tiny bit of it in the bottom of the map in the memo there. In reflection of working with the RPC, we agreed that the part south of the interstate is both zoned for and planned for light industrial, and it is physically pretty disconnected. The bike ped network, while we have continued goals to get more there, is not really there. And so we concurred and decided to have that part as recommended to you that be enterprise. So that's sort of, I think, an important context question there. In the left-hand side of the map, you see an area that is a growing residential neighborhood and mixed-use neighborhood. That was in the lower map. That's sort of that's in the PGA area. That is intentionally located in a place that is geographically central in both South Burlington and Chittenden County, and the designs for that neighborhood include a lot of bike ped connectivity to hopefully create an environment where employment and housing are proximate to one another, which is a big goal. The two neighborhoods that you see that are kind of in the lower map that are kind of isolated, those are longstanding neighborhoods of 1 through 4 family homes. Our long-term planning in the city has always been to, while they are a little bit isolated, to make sure that they are physically connected and to ensure that they can continue to exist and thrive. So our planning and our zoning for those pre-existing neighborhoods keeps them in that way. The intent for the rest of the area that in the lower map is shown in the enterprise is to make sure that we're reserving land, both large format businesses and to some extent the supporting needs that they have, which include overnight accommodations, which include most recently a little bit of expansion to allow for, supporting businesses to the employees that are going to be working there. It is not an area where we are intending long-term ownership or rental housing, because as part of our economic development strategic plan, it is really important that we're making sure that there are places where large format businesses can exist and can thrive, like Beta, like others. Alex, to your specific question about sort of north of Kimball and south of Kimball, we've wrestled with that exact question a fair amount. Williston Road itself has regular transit service, and so it is right on transit line. The lot sizes are quite a bit smaller than they are south of Kimball Avenue, but also it's very proximate to the airport. And what we're seeing in the last handful of years is right along there is where the new campus for Beta is forming. And so some of those lots are being consolidated. At this time, we've chosen to allow for essentially the same uses in both of those areas, though we allow a little bit more flexibility for overnight accommodations on larger lots. We got some feedback from the business community that they're interested in having sort of places where people who are coming to work from out of town for extended stay accommodations can stay on site and do work. And so we have enabled that to happen on some of the larger lots. We agree, broadly with the RPC, and actually specifically with the RPC about this, sort of, if we think about it in the context of central Chittenden County, this is intended to be an overall mixed use area. And At the same time, we acknowledge, and we acknowledge the Act 250 benefits that come out of it, of being PGA versus enterprise. At the same time, it's really important to us that we all feel really good about what the board ultimately decides in this. And that's why we really appreciate that you given the opportunity to have another robust conversation about this and decide where you're going to plan. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, I think it does for the most part. Essentially, as I had indicated, I think at our prior meeting, I think it's consistent with the statutory intent to have planned growth areas incorporate enterprise zoning districts. I don't think that's a problem, but it is a matter of scale and context. And as we discussed at the last meeting, it does seem like this area along Kimball Ave, both in South Burlington and into Williston, and then south of the interstate, is a large enough block of essentially industrial only land use planning that it might warrant as an enterprise series of enterprise future land use areas. And I appreciate the fact that you spoke to the area south of the interstate. So that's helpful context to hear that the city and the Regional Planning Commission are considering putting that into the enterprise land use type, along with potentially some areas in Williston adjacent. So it just again makes me think like the area south of Kimball Ave, it's adjacent to, growth area, no doubt. Does it more accurately belong in an enterprise designation in the same way that the other areas I just mentioned are headed? But I appreciate the context, Paul. Thank you.
I guess the only other thing I'd add, Alex, is if ultimately the board decides to have that whole area be, say, enterprise, I would still advocate for the two existing neighborhoods to be something other than that. If it's not appropriate to be PGA, to be transition, because we don't want to send the message of that we're trying to transition those longstanding neighborhoods out of being housing. So just to sort of, you talked about the pockets there, they're a quirk of history, but it's important to us to not imply otherwise.
Yeah, and thanks, Paul. And honestly, at the front end of this consideration last fall, I think one of my initial comments was, I've lived here a long time. Williston Road seems like a good candidate for a transition infill area, right? It has a development pattern that is evolving and seems like a good candidate for that. But when the map came in as planned growth area, I can see it from that standpoint too, that it is part of the growth area and things will transition even if they're part of a planned growth area future land use designation, maybe more so. So I guess my question back to you, Paul, is the city's land use planning for the Williston Road corridor? I guess you already addressed this. It's substantially different than the land use planning for the area south of Kimball Ave, right? You said smaller lot sizes. So there's more potential for growth in that Williston Road corridor of the type that in a mixed use fashion.
I think it is a practical, I'm going to answer your question slightly differently than you're asking it. The historic development pattern will lead to somewhat different outcomes in those areas because of the existing small lot scale. So it has been the nature of the Williston Road itself to be a little more wanting to be, up and coming small businesses, medium-sized businesses, whereas Technology Park and O'Brien and Tilly Drive have really been opportunities for headquarters to be located. And so while the land use categories are often fairly similar, the scale and form of development has, and we expect to continue to be, quite different. they're both areas that are well set up to be primarily business oriented, both due to their geographic location and just where they are relative to the interstate and to city center, and also where they are relative to the airport and the runways of the airport.
And so I'll promise last question for me for the moment. That area along Williston Road, then, I think our board had some concern about Technology Park being completely off limits to residential, although as Sarah indicated, there appears to be some potential for short-term stays related to the businesses that are there. Is Williston Road the same then, Paul, due to all those factors you mentioned, that new residential development is not allowed?
Other than the accommodations definition, that's correct. For both, because it is important to the region that there are some areas where we can know that an auto body shop can exist, for example, and not be next to housing. And because its proximity in some parts of it to the airport and, all these, airport with noise and sound and all of that, our current planning would be that Technology Park and the parts of Williston Road that aren't those two neighborhoods would be principally non-residential. There is some conversation about the area west of the Potash Brook, which you see in the green line through there, about whether some additional opportunities for mixed use might exist in there, but that's not in our plan. Sort of flags that as a future consideration.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful.
So I think it's Sarah, and I just want to add, when we were talking with other regional planning entities about the use of transition versus PGA, and there were some areas that we were sort of scratching our head and thinking that perhaps they might want to be PGA, but for the fact that they didn't have the municipal plans, they didn't have the local subdivision and zoning regulations. And I think what's evident here is South Burlington has done that and has done all the planning for it. And perhaps that's why it's in a higher category of PGA versus transition. I think it's something that we talked about as a board in terms of Chittenden County could in some ways have its own future land use areas because it's at a different scale and different density than a lot of the other areas that we looked at. And what gets lost too in downgrading from a PGA to an enterprise or to a transition area is the loss of possibility for a tier 1A. And getting back to some of the things that we're trying to accomplish in terms of growth, housing targets in general, I think this is an area that could really benefit from that. And South Burlington has done the planning and appears ready to serve for that in a larger context. So to me, I endorse the idea of this whole area being a PGA. I think that the relevant requirements are met. I hear you, Alex, in terms of south of the interstate, perhaps being more of an area to give in terms of maybe that should be more of an enterprise for the time being. I don't think it should preclude that in the future because you have the vicinity of Dorset Park and a lot of residential around that where it could be potentially in the future. But I think north of the interstate, both sides of Kimball to me were more evident of a PGA area. Other thoughts, Kirsten?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of looking at this area a little bit more like how I think Alex is. And while I certainly recognize the definitions that are currently within the Act 250 rules that have in part to do with counting dwelling units, I don't myself interpret that like a hotel or a motel is in of itself housing. And so when I think about the factors that are to be met for an area to qualify for a planned growth area, I think that has you know, while it's certainly a type of lodging dwelling accommodation, it's not the type of housing that I think that PGA, Village Center, downtowns are focused on, being the more, permanent, long-term type of, units. And though I certainly appreciate your pointing out some of these could be extended stay, so I do kind of see a difference between the area north and south of Kimball Ave. Like, I think, I don't want to speak for Alex, but like, I think he's just asking, how those might be differentiated. So, um, you know, I, that's kind of how I'm seeing it. And I do certainly appreciate that. Yeah, I agree with Sarah in that, yeah, it is a Chittenden County, is its own, um, set of, factors, conditions, settlement, geography, like it's not, you could have, as Sarah points out, like lots of other different types of subcategories, but in terms of the ones that we're all stuck with, I'm not sure I'm seeing like the housing element between like Kimball Ave and the interstate. But I'm just one of five, and
Well, let me ask a couple of clarifying questions from the board, and then I'd also like to hear from Brooke. I think the definition for PGA within state statute talks about plan for a mixed use area. And so if you're looking at a larger area and there's an area within that sub area that allows for housing, but another sub area that allows for commercial, does that accomplish the same thing? Or does it mean that, or is the board interpreting that to mean that the whole area has to allow for mixed use on every parcel within it? Alex?
Definitely, it does not have to be mixed use everywhere. I think that's clear to me in the statutory intent, and I think the definition of an enterprise area is both flawed and somewhat instructive in a flawed way, in that, the way the statute's written, it envisions those enterprise areas not being adjacent to planned growth areas or downtowns, right? The legislature was thinking these are going to be the gravel pits and the industrial parks way far away from things, thinking that enterprise areas that are adjacent to planned growth and downtowns would likely just be swept up into them. So I think it's fine to have areas like this that that don't allow a full mix of use. The question just comes down to scale and what else is next to it. And honestly, thank you, Kirsten, for letting me speak for myself, because I can definitely see it both ways, right? I can make an argument and can see that if south of 89 and east of Potash Brook in Williston, there are enterprise zones that this one might be logically an enterprise zone too, particularly given the overwhelming influence of the airport in terms of, what can happen there, residentially speaking. But at the same time, Paul's not wrong, and I don't think you are either, Sarah. Like, this is adjacent to a planned growth area, and there's lots of residential development happening just to the west in the O'Brien project. Presumably many of those people, or at least some of them, will be able to bike to work in Technology Park. And it's a live to work environment that's close enough to make that pass a straight face test along those lines. So I can definitely see it both ways. And I'm just trying to better understand it, given the differences in parcel sizes and types of existing uses and the like. In my mind, like I want us to defer when these kind of sticky situations come up. So as much as I'm raising the issue, I think I still prefer to defer to the Regional Planning Commission and the city on this. If they feel strongly that, this is part of South Burlington's planned growth area, I'd prefer not to get in their way. That's sort of where I'll leave it for me.
Brooke?
Well, I'm glad to hear that because I didn't want to have to go to a arm wrestling uh, with Alex on this because I am in Sarah's camp on it, and it's because I don't think it's relevant whether okay, there's something else somewhere else that's kind of the same thing, and that's more enterprisey or whatever. I think it meets the statutory definition. And that's the most important aspect to me is does it pass that bar or not? Even if it portions of it or whatever might be better described as something else. And in the planned growth area statutory definition, it talks about these areas include the high density existing settlement and future growth areas with high concentrations of population, housing, and employment in each region and town as appropriate. So it ties it to the context of the area anyway. And then it talks about it includes a mix of historical, non-historical, commercial, residential, and civic and cultural sites. So to me, I think that the argument about, well, this is a larger area, it may encompass, the islands of, that they're calling out. But isn't that whole thing, can it all be looked at as the one thing that may have component parts that in the end satisfy that definition? So I think I'm on her side of the fence.
Kirsten.
Yeah, I just wanted to reply to part of what I think was maybe Taylor's question, or maybe it was you, Kate, as to does the definition mean that like the entire area and every parcel? I don't interpret it that way. I think that it is looked at more kind of holistically. So thank you, Alex, for kind of adding to your observations. And
So is the answer from the board, do more homework, bring it back to us, and I think to sort of summarize, if this is something that the RPC and the city feel strongly on, to present that with the final application with the supplemental information supporting it, and we will consider it. Is that a fair summary of where the board's at? I'm seeing
Sounds
one
good to
head
me.
nod. Okay,
I think so.
seeing a couple of head nods. Kirsten?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Is there anything else, Taylor, that you wanted to get through, or is that?
That's it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for taking the time to talk that through as a board. It's great to watch you guys work. I might stick around a little bit longer and watch you guys work with LCPC. But thanks again.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Kate. and Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to Memorial, and Brooke, why don't you take it away?
Right. Let me start off by saying we posted a draft of the Land Use Review Board's pre-application response, which was our comments of our various board members that were collated into one document. In response, Lamoille got in touch with me and we did some corrections to that document. So what I'm going to share today is a slightly altered piece that corrected some language remnants where I had forgotten to take out the question about whether or not something passed the standard. So let me share my screen and we can go through these hopefully fairly quickly. Because I think much of the plan seemed to hit on target, but we have a number of advisory recommendations that we want to go through. And I'm just going to go through it numerically, chronologically through the document, if that's okay, trying not to give people motion sickness as we do that. So in the beginning, there are a couple of very general comments, just in terms of organization or style. In terms of the furthering the state planning goals, we're just suggesting that the plan would benefit from restructuring to place actions and policies at the end of chapters after providing the background and explaining terms used. It's an organizational suggestion. And again, our advisory recommendations are not anything other than offering some advice to perhaps improve the document and or the planning underlying it, and they are not indicating any kind of failure to meet the standard, just so you're very clear on that. So then let's move down to conformance with 4302B, which is whether or not there was meaningful community engagement. And we indicated that in terms of the plan, improving the linkage to public input as a foundation for the plan. I think there's good descriptors of what was done in terms of that public engagement, but sort of anchoring it back would be beneficial, we think. See, page 6 is now we're going over the goals. This one has to do with the let's see. We wanted to just call out reference the applicable basin plan, its status, the applicable water quality policies and actions therein, and how Lamoille Regional Plan aligns with it. By the way, board members, if this is your comment, jump in if you want to further explain or describe what you were referring to, if you would like. Kirsten?
I'll jump in to say that was my comment, and I think it was just went to meeting that element of the requirement.
Okay. Just to maintain and improve quality of water, air, wildlife, forests, and other resources. That's great. So we're going to buzz down to 16. Oh, and
Well, no,
do you want
hold on
me
a
to wait? Do you want me to back up and talk?
Yeah. There is an element of the goal that prescribes that it has to, align with the current basin plan. And for some reason, I'm not seeing that within your wording here.
Let's back up a minute and look at the goal to make sure we have the statutory language.
Yeah, so B, maintain water quality should be maintained and approved according to the policies and actions developed in the basin plans. That's the nexus.
Okay. Now, do you feel that this is something that is absent? So this is not a recommendation. We need to have this modified.
It was quite a while that I provided those comments. I think that it wasn't clear to me what the status of the basin plan was or the elements and how the plan sort of reflected the basin planning. And so, it says should, right? Vermont's water quality should be maintained and improved. So that's not a must, shall, will. It's, but I think that it should be addressed, but I don't know. I'm interested to know what others think.
We have a hand raised from the Wall County Planning. If you could identify yourself when you speak, please.
Sure. Are we on now? Hi, it's Tasha Wallace from the Will County Planning Commission. We actually, when we do the adoption, there's actually a conformance letter that we send to the secretary, stating that it is in conformance with the relevant taxable basin plan, so that we can, and this section was not modified through this process, so we can send that to you. But we fully understand that requirement of statute.
Okay, That sounds excellent. And thank you, Tasha.
So do we want to leave it sort of advisory to be followed up on, just we know that'll happen, or how do we want to handle it?
I'm
I
fine
like
leaving
leaving
it.
it as an advisory recommendation, just the way it is. That way it's flagged for Tasha and company to address however they see fit, whether it's a minor tweak to reference the basin plan in the regional plan or additional documentation of the sort she just mentioned.
You okay with that, Sarah? And Kirsten?
Yes,
I'm okay with that.
Great, okay. So let's see.
Brooke,
Go
as you
down.
page down, there's just a silly typo on page 7 at the top. At least I think it's a typo. It says at the end of one sentence, except for land use references per Act 18. I assume that is Act 181.
I'm not sure where you're talking about. The top of page
Top
7.
of page 7, board response looks to be the
Oh,
maybe the
okay, yep, got
second
it,
sentence.
got it. Yep, got it. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so we're going down to 16. Sorry, whoops, looks like I missed one. Here it is. All right, so now this is the environmental justice section, and I think that the board was consistent in its concern on this. So what we provided were requested revisions. We think that the environmental justice section should be further detailed, and the public engagement process and the populations engaged in the content of the plan to meet the statutory requirements. We're not saying that you haven't performed the actions, but that they do need to be better described and presented in the context of the benefits and burdens analysis, and to beef that section up, if that's an accurate overall description of what we're looking for. We have specific page numbers and action items that we are mentioning in terms of having to address to try to guide the further analysis of that section. Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Brooke, for capturing this. And I would just say that from my standpoint as one board member, I think that the paragraph that starts board response is more important to me than the specific requested revisions that are in the bullets below. Like I don't want Tasha and the rest of the Region Planning Commission to think that if they don't fully address the 5th bullet or the 5th and 6th bullet, that it's going to be a problem. It's more general to me that we need more information about the focus populations, the environmental justice focus populations, and the equity analysis. And yeah, some of those requested revisions specifically could be helpful, but I don't want them to be misconstrued, at least from my perspective, as must address and or must fix.
Yeah,
Others may think differently.
Yeah, and when I took the different board comments, yeah, I mean, I thought the more general comments, I do agree, they are the most descriptive and important than the requested revision, bullet points. I was trying to just organize it into those categories because it kind of read that way. But yes, absolutely, I agree. And Kirsten?
Yeah, just kind of ditto. I mean, I was going to say, I don't think we need to prescribe this level of specificity. Like it's helpful to outline it, but not in the format of that this is like a requested, explicitly sort of required revision. I think a revision is required, but doesn't necessarily have to be every one of these bullets. So thanks. It sounds like you'll work on some refinement of the wording.
Well, tell me what should we call them? Advisory revisions or recommendations like we are in the other section? And the board response is sort of required, or?
Well, I think that the requested revision could be, revise the plan to provide a robust description of environmental benefits and burdens and to provide an analysis of how they're distributed across the county. And then this is sort of like advisory, these bullets.
Mhm.
But others may have some ideas of how to best to present it.
So,
I think I'm in Kirsten's camp, Brooke, for the sake of you revising the document. Yep, I think what she suggested would be an appropriate way to handle it and would make it consistent with other sections of this response letter rather than inventing a different nomenclature for these kinds of suggestions. Yeah, and I would just reiterate, like the second bullet, it says the brownfield section is a lost opportunity.
right.
Like that's perhaps helpful, but if they continue to not take advantage of that opportunity in the final version, I'm not going to vote to say that the plan doesn't conform, right? It's more the general stuff that Kirsten called out that is what I think needs to be addressed.
Yep, I gotcha. I can work on that language to bring it in line. And yes, some of these are just mentions or advisory, but I understand. So I think we will, I don't want to waste our time going through the minutia of the wording. I think I understand if you guys are okay and I can alter it and then we can run it by next meeting.
I think
Make sure
Tasha might
it's-
have her hand up again or someone at
Oh, is
Lamoille.
that who? Oh, okay. I thought it was Sarah. I guess that's the other room. That's why I was confused. Sure, Tasha?
Sure, can you hear me? Hi,
Yep.
Tasha Wallace, LaBelle County Planning Commission. Just for your information, we understand the feedback about the environmental justice section. So it's our intent to revise our plan and to follow the model that Northwest Regional Planning Commission did for their environmental justice section, because we understand you guys really like that. And I think that using that model will address your concerns.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. All righty, well, let's move on then so that we can make sure we get through all of these. There are some more just to take a quick look at. Let's see. We need okay. In the natural resources and working lands section, we have a number of advisory mentions. We know there's a lot of conserved land. That's something that comes through loud and clear in the plan. Now, the advisory recommendations we have, we've segmented them into two different sections, one for natural resources. And some of these are observations, by the way, these advisory recommendations, you might see on occasion just an observation made. Sarah, I think most of these were yours, if I'm not mistaken. Do you want to highlight any of these?
No, I think, they're just advisory in terms of comments. And I think it was nice that you included some of my like positive ones under working lands too as well. I don't know if for the sake, you do need to include the positive feedback in terms of advisory recommendations, but thank you.
And I can remove those if everyone thinks in the final version, they're unnecessary, but I thought that they were very interesting observations and I liked them. But if they don't really have a place in the final version, that's okay too, if folks feel differently. Kirsten?
I think it's fine to include them as sort of observations. I'll just mention, because you were asking, I think, where did these originate? I'm the board member who made reference to the logging AMPs. And that would be consistent with having noted it in other pre-application regional plans.
Right, I do remember adding that one. I combined them and put you as a bullet point in that section. Yep. Great.
Yeah, so for
Alrighty.
consistency, I would be inclined not to omit that one, but if others don't want to retain this stuff, that's okay too. I mean, not completely stuck on it.
Oh, I was thinking more about like, Sarah, for example, called out page 332, includes a very comprehensive forestry discussion. Well done. She was, mentioning that it was something that was, she noticed that was very good. So it's not a recommendation to change anything. So those are the ones I was thinking maybe we would pull out because they're not to recommend to do anything. Anyway, all right. Let's move
Alex?
on.
Did you
Oh,
have
I'm sorry,
something?
Alex?
Yeah, so Brooke, I agree with you that there's a lot that's nicely done in this plan. I don't want to I don't want to select just a few items and say good job when in isolation. Like that seems I don't want to do that. So I'd prefer to get rid of the nicely done comments. There's lots of nicely done things, not just the ones that were mentioned. Two other things. One, I thought I remember looking at the Lamoille plan for references to acceptable management practices for logging. I thought it was in there, which is why I didn't flag it originally. So I don't know.
Well,
I don't want to step on Kirsten on your toes if you felt like it wasn't mentioned somewhere in the plan. I remember thinking the same thing and thinking, oh, they did it. um, so take that with a grain of salt.
I think they had a lot of really good content about working lands, logging, forestry, farming. It was great. I didn't see that specifically. I could have missed it. I'm not sure that there were the ag AMPs. I apologize too. It's been a while since I had sent the comments, but I
Yeah.
actually think maybe it was more ag AMPs that weren't found. Brooke, are you remembering that?
Yeah, I know that you mentioned both of them and I waited on the ag ones because I think you were unsure of that one, but maybe I had it
Yeah.
reversed. We can double check. We can
Yeah,
double
let's
check.
Yeah,
double check.
It's not a big deal to leave it in, and Tasha can, school us about you missed page 372, and it's mentioned there if we did. The other thing, Brooke, is that the first, let's see, sorry, the first bullet under natural resources talks about as requested in previous plans, please provide the percentage of in biophysical regions. And I'm all over that in other plans, but it's important to note that the Lamoille County region is basically all in one biophysical region. It's all northern Green Mountains. There's a tiny, tiny slice of it in the Champlain Hills on one side of the county, but it's sort of not significant. So I don't think they actually need to separate this into biophysical regions because they're only in one biophysical region.
Okay, so should I just remove that one?
I think so.
Tasha has her hand up, I think. Tasha?
Oh, hey, just quickly, Tasha Wallace, Lamoille County Planning Commission. Staff were raising their hands and talking to me that both types of ag and forestry practices are mentioned in the plan. So,
Okay, the amps. So I can take that out, guys? Alex?
Go for it.
Okay.
That's all I have.
And then the first one up here, we should be okay to remove that.
I think so, yes.
Kirsten, you okay with that?
Yes.
Alrighty. Can we move on? Heard anybody? Okay. So then we have for energy section, we have a few suggestions. Wait a minute. Do I have this in the wrong place? No, okay.
You got it in the right spot.
Oh, explain why. Yeah, okay. The Emerald Ash Borer thing. Yep, gotcha. All right, there are just some suggestions. And then let's keep going. This is transportation. Do you want to talk about transportation recommendations or advisory recommendations?
I just want to note that they are, many of these are highly specific. And while I appreciate all of our diligence on the board, drilling down into the details, I'm not convinced that we need to raise all of these very highly specific items as a part of our conformance review, even as an advisory recommendation. So that's not very helpful because I'm not telling you which bullets to potentially eliminate, but that was my general sense as I read down this list was like, I think we're going a little deeper than we need to go.
Kirsten?
I had the same kind of reaction
Okay.
as far as overall depth.
Sarah? What say you?
I'm fine with you taking out some of the typo stuff. This last bullet point, I don't think is. I don't think is appropriate at this time.
AOT? Take that out?
That's one that we raised in other reviews, didn't we, though?
Well, yeah,
This- I-
so we did, but the AOT Act 181 study hadn't yet been completed. So yeah, I wasn't sure what to do with that, Sarah. This one came from me and it's consistent with the advisory recommendation provided to the other RPCs as part of their pre-application. I think Rutland was actually started out as like a required change. And then it became advisory, and now the study's been done, and this is sort of a placeholder on. So Sarah, your thinking is that we don't need to, because maybe, well, tell me more about how you're viewing this. Would be
Well, I think
great.
you just articulated it all, is it was prior to the Act 21 study being completed. I think we're on to a new phase and, so I think that that's something that we don't need to articulate now.
Well, the
I think also
study,
given I think there are 2 tier 1B areas for the entire county. I see this as being also significantly less applicable applicable to Lamoille.
yeah, I would agree. The study does have some recommendations that are specific to RPCs. So in that vein, I don't know if it makes sense to have it referenced, or if the RPC has had a chance to look at it or may have thoughts. And I don't know what other board members think.
Let
Yeah,
me.
I want to be a less is more person, but at the same time, I do think it's based on our prior conversations. I do think it's relevant as to how the region thinks larger scale transportation improvements would be made in areas where there was no impact fee happening anymore due to exemptions. And Stowe comes to the top of my list for this region as a place that's experiencing significant transportation and traffic congestion issues. Were it to be exempt within the Tier 1B area, how capital improvements would be funded on a fair share mechanism is still kind of an open question in my mind. So I see the
Yeah.
value of still having this in here, but I don't disagree, Sarah. It seems a little awkward that we're using the similar language to what we used before the study was finished, although this talks about the study having been submitted. So, yeah.
Yeah, you make a good point about Stowe. I was, in my mind, I was thinking Morristown and Johnson. You're absolutely right, Alex.
Yeah, but my concern about this is, I mean, of course, Stowe, like, and they know, right? And I think that this is, but we have to have like what I want to avoid is this is a plan that's been drafted, right? And where does it stop? Oh, now there's this study. Now you need to incorporate the findings of that study that just got completed. And it's like, wait a minute, at what point is the stop date for the plan to be completed, right? It's like, I
Yes,
feel like
but
this is throwing something new and of course they're dealing with, I mean, traffic is probably the biggest issue for Stowe, right? I don't
and
know.
again, Brooke, these are advisory recommendations.
Yeah.
I'll be on record to say again, like if Lamoille County Regional Planning Commission revises their plan and brings us back a final version that does not address this at all, they will get an upvote from this board member. It's advisory only. So I still think, and maybe it's just because it's us and we are involved in those tier areas. And so we are thinking about what happens when projects become exempt from our permitting program and the impact fees suddenly disappear. But still seems relevant to me. As long as they understand, like, you don't have to go there, but you might want to think about it.
Right, gotcha. All right, so we leave
I
it
think
in as
that
advisory.
item, it wasn't that item that was drawing my attention of too much detail. It was actually the bullets prior to that.
Right.
So
Do we want to go
It
through
makes
it?
sense to me.
For
Do we
the
wanna-
sake of time, what I'd like to offer is instead of us continuing to sort of nitpick a bit, is I think overall what I'm hearing from the board is we can be more succinct and we can cut out maybe some of the typos or the good job references. I think some of the advisory ones we can let stand as being just advisory. And hopefully we can continue to sort of move through with some efficiency because we haven't even gotten to the specific land use sections yet. But Kirsten, do you have anything more on that front before I sort of cut Brooke loose to continue on?
I think that's a good summary, Sarah. And my vote would be to retain that last more lengthy bullet as an advisory.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Utility and facility, we have a couple suggestions about legends and let's just keep moving through it. All right, economic development, we have a few advisory recommendations. Pretty minimal.
Yes, but please get rid of the woodworking school one. That seems so hyper specific and technical that I'm not sure why it's important enough for them to worry about, even as an
So
advisory.
Alex, that was mine. I'll just say, I think the whole school has, or the whole precision working is shut down and no longer. And so maybe that could just be deleted if it is no longer an operational business, but
Gotcha.
Mhm. All right. This is on future land use. We have some suggestions. Anyone want to highlight any of them that are important to mention? Okay, we'll keep going. Yeah, we're at the downtown centers. And here we go. Village centers. Now, I said earlier, I did this a different version. I corrected Belvedere and Cambridge. I had some mistakes in them, as well as the Stowe village centers that I got mixed up. So Belvedere, I want to draw your attention to the Belvedere Corners Village Center at Belvedere. It's on the border of Belvedere and Waterville. And I was unclear whether or not this was an advisory or explanation of some sort comment, or if this is a required, doesn't meet the standard kind of thing. So consider redesignating the entire Belvedere Junction Village Center flu area around the intersection of 109 and Back Road. It does not seem to meet the statutory definition of village center. It might be, I'm not sure who that it was, Alex, maybe?
Yep, that was me. So happy to have us have some round robin discussion on that because it's not just an advisory thing potentially. What do others think of that, and do we need to share a screen so we can look at it?
I'm gonna stop sharing it if we want to look at a map.
Do you want me to share it, Brooke?
If you have it, if you could pull up the map here, that'd be great, Kirsten.
Okay, so we're talking about this western one
Yeah, the western one.
that's right alongside Waterville. Can you see that?
Yep.
So, I think that, yeah, that's the river court. I'm just kind of showing you what's on.
It's got about
It's
20
a
parcels.
non-legacy. Oh, sorry, I don't have the parcels on. Sorry about that.
Got about 20
There are other layers
parcels.
that people would like me to turn on.
The northern edge of the village is the north branch of the Lamoille River. Yeah, the area does not have any historic sites of record and appears mostly residential in nature with one church. Several parcels in the proposed village center are either entirely or partially within the river corridor, which is an overlaid layer.
Does that help if I turn it on and off so everyone can kind of get refamiliarized with it?
That's good. Can you zoom it one click?
Is that good?
Yeah, that's good. Sarah?
So I didn't have a problem with this area. It seemed to be a pretty tightly constrained area because of the river corridor. And while it could be a hamlet, it could also be a small village. And I think just overall, contextually, too, in Lamoille, there's a lot less tier 1B areas because of a lack of zoning and a lack of municipal plans. There's a lack of PGA areas. And so to me, while it could be a hamlet, I think that it's fine as a village area, even though it is so constrained, just because contextually, I think Lamoille is not getting a proportional number of village areas compared to some other areas. So just a counter to Alex's point, I guess.
What are you thinking, Kirsten?
Well, I don't know. I am noting that like much of the planned growth area is river corridor. Or I'm sorry, much of the like the village center is river corridor. Yeah, I had not myself flagged this as one that I thought was problematic. Do you want me to show the proximity to the other center? So the one thing that I thought was it jumped out at me was that, on the Waterville side of the shared municipal line, it's kind of abruptly transitions to, rural general. That was a bit, struck me as a bit,
Kirsten, could you stop moving around so much?
I'm
please?
sorry. Okay. Is that
And
Sarah?
if you want, I know one of the things that you were clicking was the flood hazard area. If you go down under the flu areas, I think that there's that cross hatching that you can turn on instead down below under the flu area for Memorial. I think it's a cross hatching that you can turn on. You do the drop down under the oil.
Sorry, I'm kind of, sorry, I'm blanking on under the future land use drop down.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Sorry, I'm kind of blanking on, I know what you're talking about. For some reason, I'm not. It's not here under the base map data, right? It's not.
It's at the very bottom, Kirsten, and it's
Click on
it's
those
under
options.
it's under FLU and Tier 1AB data, the very bottom, and then underneath that you'll see a legend item for each regional planning commission. And if you open up Lamoille, then you'll have the
Okay.
option to turn that on.
Okay, and then I'm going to turn off the. Does that help, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay. So
So
yeah,
to be clear,
you know,
I brought this up as a potential issue, less because of the flood hazard or river corridor area overlay, although that's part of it, and more just because of whether the area meets the statutory definition of a village center, right? These are the mixed use centers bringing together community economic activity and civic assets. And they are the traditional and historic central business and civic centers within planned growth areas or may stand alone. I just don't know that this is that. I guess that's my primary thought on why maybe this is really rural general and not a village center, whereas the one up the road in Belvedere, I believe, does have some of those community assets where I wasn't clear that this location had any.
would
It has a
someone from
church.
Lamoille want to speak to how they interpret that it does meet the definition?
Sure, yeah, Seth will speak to that. Thank you.
Yeah, so this,
Introduce yourself.
oh, I'm Seth Jensen, Deputy Director, Lamoille County Planning Commission. So I've met with the Belvedere Select Board and Planning Commission over the years about this area as well as the center where their school and town office and other facilities are located. This area is smaller than those areas. There's a church that is active but is used by members of the church. This village is also, while it's not within the village, one of the covered bridges that is an area and a draw to the community is located just outside. And my understanding from the community is that it is used as a gathering place in the summer. The church parking area and for a swimming hole that is north of the village. So it is definitely smaller scale in terms of its draw to the community from the center. But from the scale of Belvedere, it still is more active than the rest of the community, which is why the select board had asked us to bring attention and recognize it as separate from the rural general, this generally along the main roads through Belvedere.
Might I zoom in a little bit? Would that be of interest?
I think this is a good view.
Okay, I'm just gonna, okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I'll repeat what I said when we were talking about the Chittenden County plan earlier today. I want to, where there's a call to be made, I want to give deference to the region and the municipality. So if staff and the rest of the regional planning commission staff and the community really feel like this is an appropriate village center, and and there's at least one other board member or two who thinks so too, I'm happy to back down and just say never mind. But that was my reasoning. Just so you know, it didn't appear to have the mix of civic assets and mixed use that would make it more than the hamlet that it might actually be.
Okay,
Yeah, it feels like it's kind of maybe on the cusp between would certainly qualify as a hamlet. Um,
well, I would like to provide that flexibility because I think it's important, especially in Lamoille where we have an awful lot of flood hazard area. We're trying to develop things in a more responsible way, and we are very limited in terms of where those places are.
I'm going to stop sharing if that's okay.
Actually, while you have the map up, why don't we go to the Stowe Mountain Crossroads Village, if you don't mind? That was the other one that we had some question as to whether or not it should be redesignated. It's the intersection of Route 108 and Edson Hill Road.
I'm just gonna. All right.
Let me just, while she's bringing that up, let me just say, so this village center is proposed at the intersection of Edson Hill Road and Mountain Road and includes lodging establishments, restaurants, and residences. The West Branch Little River flood hazard area runs along the southern and western boundary. And then we were unclear if this is a traditional or a historic center or what civic components may exist within the area. And our advisory or requested revision, I'm not sure which, but it's consider redesignating the village center flu area. It does not appear to meet the statutory definition of village center.
So, Brooke, did I take you to the right spot?
Yep, the other upper Edson Hill.
Oh, the other
No,
one. Okay, I apologize.
I think you had the right
I'm
spot,
sorry,
Kirsten.
I'm sorry. Wait a minute.
Yeah,
wait a
no,
minute. I'm
that's the
confused.
one,
I'm sorry.
right?
I'm sorry.
Yep. You have the
I
right
Yeah, I
yet
one.
don't think
again.
there's.
I'm sorry. Yet again,
That's okay. That's all
I
right.
have the blobs confused.
Do you want me to turn on, like, just whatever layers you want on? I'm gonna turn off the future land use map designations for a moment so everyone can get kind of like a visual, if that's okay.
road names on.
So Kirsten, Sarah, could you turn off the wetlands, RTE, significant natural communities, and the rivers under natural resources? And if we want to view any of the river corridors, let's use that cross hatching.
How's that?
Fantastic, thank you.
And Kirsten, if you could turn on the road layer, it's a reference layer.
Very top.
That would be helpful to have some road names in there.
Yeah.
Thank you for piloting, Kirsten.
No problem. I can start zooming us in and out and all around to make everyone dizzy pretty quickly. So just tell me what you want me to do or not do.
I was getting a little bit motion sick there. It was like an amusement ride. It was fun.
All right, so does this village center meet the statutory definition?
And I'll just note that I think that I brought up this concern on this area this time.
You were not alone, Sarah. I also raised the issue.
I question it as well. Like I think there's some history of zoning but
Tasha, you have anything you want to provide to us for consideration?
Sure, Tasha Wallace, the Lamoille County Planning Commission. I just want to point out that Sarah from the town of Stowe, I believe, is on, and I would suggest that you might have her present on this to hear it straight from them. That would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Hey, Sarah. Would you like to weigh in on this one?
Well, just to help Sarah out, she addressed this I believe she addressed this during the public meeting we had on this regional plan and mentioned that this particular area had plans made for it by the town, but they hadn't been realized yet. And there was some question in my mind, that whether those plans were really ever going to come to fruition, which was part of why I brought it up along with Sarah, apparently.
Hey, this is Sarah McShane, Tennisto. Alex is right. So in the late 90s, the town rezoned Mountain Road and established a few new zoning districts. This is one of them, the Mountain Road Village and the Mountain Road Crossroad. And this one we call it the MRC. And there is not any civic component, and it's definitely not a traditional Vermont village center. But it's long been, as part of our town plan, a vision to create a center at this crossroads. But it hasn't been realized as successfully as Mountain Road Village, lower down the mountain road. It's still in our town plan, but it definitely doesn't have the same development potential or redevelopment potential. So.
Anyone else want to speak to it? What are you thinking, Sarah? Our Sarah.
I think similarly to how we've addressed some of these other areas in different RPC reviews, is to put it out as advisory of, we're not quite sold on it yet, we'd like to have more information. And again, give Stowe and Lamoille a chance to either come back to us with supplemental information the way that Chittenden did today on this, or consider mapping as something else. So again, not necessarily required, but please tell us more. We're not quite there yet type of scenario.
That works for me.
Kirsten?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, great. Excellent. I'm not sure that there's anything else specific to go over. Those were the two big areas of concern. Sorry about that. Was there any other portion of the report that anyone specifically wanted to go over? Any particular section?
Brooke, it's Sarah. I think what I'll do is just note that you revised this, I think late on Friday, to note that Morristown is now proposing a tier 1B area, and you review of that is that it meets. Correct?
Yes, great. That's important. I should have mentioned that as well. Yes, town of Morristown at town meeting, the vote was had, and they did elect to ask for tier 1B status. And it's for the Morrisville downtown center area and the Morristown planned growth area combined. And it appears that they pass every one of the requirements. And we got Lamoille raising their hand, Tasha, and then Alex.
I just did want to provide background. Seth Jensen, Deputy Director, Lamoille County Planning Commission. Just providing background is that the community was in the process of considering making the request when we submitted the preliminary application. And the, as was noted last week, the select board did vote to pursue a tier 1B designation. The resolution was forwarded, and we're happy to answer questions about that today. As I know that is, you know, a new request from when you conducted the site visit, though we did do a walk in downtown. But I'm happy to address any questions the board has about that community's request.
Great, thank you, Seth. Appreciate it. Alex?
So yeah, just to clarify the area that we are talking about, when I look at our future land use area map viewer and turn on the tier 1B area proposed for Lamoille County, it includes all of the Morristown, Morrisville, downtown center and surrounding planned growth area. And yeah, my recollection was that there was some question during the public meeting about whether, you know, just exactly what that area would be in the end for tier 1B. So is it the entire area? What is the area for tier 1B?
I just went ahead
The
and
area-
shared the image if that's helpful.
You know, the community at the time, one of the reasons they had not put in the request at the time that our preliminary review application went in is because they were sort of deliberating on that question. And they have elected to request for the downtown as well as the surrounding planned growth area. So on the map, that's the dark purple and the lighter purple. The two village centers that were added to the future land use map are not included in the request though. So Katie's Falls and Morristown Corners are not part of this request.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Seth. Brooke, I had given you some comments about the Morrisville planned growth area, specifically that portions of it fall within the flood hazard area or river corridor area, but don't appear to be suitable for infill because of where they are located and what is or is not around them. So I wondered if we could talk about those areas now.
The PGA areas you're talking about?
Yep.
Okay, let me find them. Hold on.
Alex, would it make sense for you to share screen and show us where?
Probably it would, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Okay, I will start sharing once I figure out where the areas were. I think you might have listed them in your response somewhere, Brooke, down towards the end of it, but it didn't read.
Yeah, I'm
like-
sorry. I don't think I captured what you're talking about when I translated stuff from emails. Because I don't have it in the PGA area.
Okay,
It may be in the very bottom with the rural areas. Hold on, let me look there. Like Eden, Johnson, Morristown. Let's see. You were suggesting, well, no, that's still on rural.
yeah, I had
So,
separate
Alex,
suggestions
can I-
on the rural side, so I can share the screen and show you.
Yeah,
I
that'd
ask
be good.
a clarifying question as well, Alex?
Yeah, go ahead.
The areas that you're gonna show us, would they be beyond the areas for which Morristown would now be requesting tier 1B? Or are they PGA where located outside of what is now going to be proposed as tier 1B? Because I think there is a different standard for PGA with respect to flood hazard river corridor, depending on whether you're within a tier 1B area or outside of a tier 1B area.
So I better just show you, and then we can talk about the differences. So here, I will share my screen and show you at least the first area. Okay, so the first area I'm talking about is in sort of the southwest corner of Morristown. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but over here, I guess I should ask the question, can you see my cursor moving?
Yes.
You can?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna zoom in. So you can see this is Route 100, the bypass. This is Feline Loop. Great name for a road. I love that name. And this area here is what I'm talking about. So it's mapped as part of the PGA, the planned growth area. And apologies, Sarah, I think I have wetland layers on here, so you're seeing some of that. I'll get rid of them. And if I turn on the cross hatching for flood hazard areas, and there they are. And so it's fine for planned growth areas to incorporate flood hazard areas, right? And as long as they're suitable for infill. And it was just my thought, and maybe the Regional Planning Commission staff can address this, that this particular area doesn't really seem appropriate for infill, but it does have development on partially on one side. So maybe I'm not analyzing that correctly, but this was one area that I thought probably didn't belong in the planned growth area along in that flood hazard area.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can answer that.
That kind of confuses me a little bit, Alex, because it's like, when is the determination made? You're sort of saying in advance whether or not infill is suitable or not without like knowing exactly where. And if we have an overlay,
My understanding, Brooke, is that the protocols that are referenced about when infill is appropriate talk about an area that is part of a flood hazard area that is either adjacent to or surrounded by existing development. So that's not spelled out in statute. It's in those protocols that the statute refers to. And so what I'm saying is this area doesn't appear to be surrounded by an existing settlement pattern that would warrant it being an infill area. It appears to be on the edge of an existing settlement area and very discrete and different from it. But I would love to hear from our regional planning partners because maybe I'm just looking at this wrong.
Alex, I think that's a great question. And the area that you're looking at, if I'm understanding, is the area there's Feline Court and then there's B Street, and you're looking at the parcel sort of access from B Street, that large area. Just making sure, yes. Good.
Where the river is essentially, and the area and the flood hazard area around it.
So that area is land that is connected to the hydroelectric generation facility and owned by the village of Morrisville, locally known as Clark Park. So it is part of the PGA in so much as it's one of the green spaces, though currently underutilized, available in the future for public improvement and public use. It's not really an area targeted for new housing, but is part of the civic fabric of the community in that way. And I think the rationale was similar to other areas like cemeteries and such when they're in the civic pattern, rather than kind of creating an island to map it as the surrounding surrounding area. And similarly, I think there's some areas on the north that the community is looking at in term for floodplain restoration, for improving the resiliency of the river, that are, again, because of our approach of using the overlays to demarcate these areas, we have wanted a differentiation between flood areas that are kind of out in the hinterlands used for agriculture versus those in the downtowns and villages or near the downtowns and villages that require potentially more active management. So happy to discuss that more. That's the rationale for that in being included in that area.
Okay, let me show you one other area. So hold on to your computer screens while I zoom out and then zoom back in. I don't want to make anyone seasick. So this is, I'm going to turn off the future land use area so everybody can see a clean aerial photo for a moment. So here's the river. This is the north side of the downtown. And here is Route 100 through the business portion. And this street is Harrell Street. And once again, the planned growth area incorporates all of that area. And maybe this is the northerly portion you were talking about, Seth. But when you turn on the flood hazard areas, they incorporate a pretty wide swath on the north side of the river, coming up towards Harrell Street. And so my interpretation of what is appropriate for infill is that areas like this wouldn't be appropriate for infill. In the way that areas that I'm indicating over here along Route 100 would be appropriate for infill. And so that's all I was calling out in this location was like, it appears that there's a floodplain that's probably never going to be developed. It wouldn't be appropriate to develop it. And so should it be in planned growth area, future land use designation or something else?
And I think that's a really good question, Alex, and that is the area known as the Harvey property that you're calling out, that the community is looking at for acquisition and floodplain restoration. From the standpoint of planning for a downtown along a waterway, I guess you look at it somewhat similar to the discussion about what is mixed use in a community or an area wide context, that the protection of those areas is part of what enables the infill and redevelopment in the more suitable areas. And that's why we use the overlay to demarcate them rather than trying to pull them out, because there's a more active approach needed when you're that close to the development pattern to really provide the protection. But I can understand on the map alone, potentially without the overlay, may make it appear that there's more land available for development than is really planned or desirable. But that is the rationale. Yeah.
Just so you know, I really appreciated your use of the overlays and the way those were presented, and I think you did it somewhat differently, at least in our meetings, than some of the other RPCs had. So I appreciate having that level of information. It's more the statutory requirement for planned growth areas that's I think is the issue here, not whether they are part of a larger whole that really does hang together logically and then is further informed by overlays like flood hazard areas. I think that the statutory description of planned growth areas, and Kirsten, I believe you had pointed this out in prior plans, like prohibits areas that are in flood hazard zones that are not appropriate for infill. So I'd be happy to have it stay planned growth area, but I don't know that we can based on the statutory construction. That's all.
So can I jump in here for a sec?
Sure.
So my understanding is like yours, Alex, that planned growth area, you can't have flood hazard or river corridor unless it's infill under the ANR rule. But then the statute for 1B says something a little bit different. And my understanding of how the board, I think, has been interpreting it is that if you have municipal bylaws that meet the standard, then PGA is treated the same as the other 3 categories of land use that can qualify for a tier 1B. But maybe we should have a chat with our attorney when we go into executive session to confirm like what I'm understanding and describing. So I think it may depend on, you know, whether or not it's part of a tier 1B or not. Yeah, I definitely have been looking at these flood hazard areas with respect to PGA, and you may remember I pointed some out, like in Shelburne, so I'm mindful of this detail, and happy that others are considering it as well as part of these plan reviews.
Tasha? Or Seth?
So I think this is, you know, a challenge, and happy to continue, you know, the discussion about it in that, you know, effectively the policies of the overlay that's ties to a physical feature, I think, do the statutory standard of removing it from the underlying, you know, promotion of growth in the planned growth area. I think Megan has, you know, pointed out part of the planning for these parcels, and we also have the challenge of overlays, especially, and the flood hazard especially, is tied in a very complex way to, you know, elevation, river area, where we're being pushed by the process for the future land use mapping areas to follow parcels. And there are areas of those parcels that are in question that are not in the floodplain, that are areas where the community has significant plans for public facilities and other uses that are appropriate for the planned growth areas. So how we thread that needle, you know, is frankly quite challenging, which is why we've depicted it, the parcels of the planned growth area with a natural feature above it, which we think has the effect of removing it. We don't think it would be appropriate, given the planned use of some of those properties and the areas along the road that are outside of the floodplain, to demarcate them as rural general, or one of the rural areas, because there will be more intensive use in the areas that are appropriate and not in the floodplain. So I'm not yet. We're trying.
I'll just say, listen, this is, you know, we work closely with the community. This pretty much follows their town plan and their zoning. We're fully cognizant of flood risk in Lamoille, and we recognize if you can't build there, you can't build there. And there are going to be parcels that you can't build on in any of our planned growth areas and any of our downtowns. And that could be because they're already cemeteries or because they're in that flood hazard area. And when we work with communities, we have those conversations again and again, that no parcel loses its, you know, identity, which includes various attributes, just because it's in a particular area. And we have tried to take a holistic approach to that mapping, cognizant of the fact that parcels have their own characteristics. And some of them you're not going to be able to do stuff on, or some of them you can only do stuff on a part of them. And so we thought that it wasn't so much threading the needle as taking a thoughtful approach to following the community's desires and being cognizant of what the landscape is.
And I guess I'll just add, when Seth was talking about
well, the Harvey property that you pointed out that's in the flood hazard area, that's just kind of
Mhm.
on the other side of the Lamoille River from the Oxbow Park. That's an area the town is looking to acquire. I mean, not just to do floodplain restoration, but out of the floodplain and the parcel, they also want to expand their parks and recreation facilities. You know, they're limited in terms of their amount of like soccer fields and, you know, recreation fields that they have in the village center. So just keep in mind that's an area that they're looking to expand their recreation facilities.
Sarah?
All right, and I think that was Megan that was just talking for our AI transcription tools purposes. But I think, Seth got at the general, idea or premise of plan growth is particularly in areas where you have larger parcels, and some of it might be in the flood hazard area, some of it might be out. I think that does allow for infill on a thoughtful and clustered way, in the area to exclude it from the flood hazard area, in a particular corner of the parcel, and the whole parcel needs to be, labeled as something from PGA. I think I'll acknowledge that Lamoille is the first RPC to come forward with an overlay. I think it's been fantastic and been very helpful in terms of being able to more holistically take a look at these areas, but also recognize the hazards that are there and the potential for exclusions. But I think this is something that maybe we can ask for with the final more information about how this is infill, and to some of the things I just heard about clustering on the larger parcels in the areas that are outside the floodplain versus, I think, to address Alex's concern about new development in the floodplain. So I think I just wanted to sort of pull those threads together. Thank you.
Great. Is there anything else that the board wants to talk about? I think that I've made some changes as we've been talking, and I will go back through and make sure to make all the changes that have been discussed. And I think then we can take a short look at it next Monday to make sure that the changes that I've made and alterations are acceptable to the board. Does that sound all right? Because we're a few minutes over time now.
Sure, with possible action next Monday too.
I think so.
All right, well, thank you, Brooke. If no one else has anything on Lamoille, we can transition into road construction. Does anybody else have anything more on Lamoille before we move on? All right, thank you, Brooke. Thank you, folks, for attending. We'll move on to our discussion on road construction jurisdiction guidelines.
Thanks, everyone.
I will say that Brooke and I were working to pull this together. You heard a bit from us last Monday on this when we were continuing to look at definitions. I think what we tried to circulate to the board was a rough guideline in its totality that I'd like to walk you through. I will share screens to do that. I think the other thing, before I share my screen, that I'll just note is this has been putting us in a tough spot because we are looking at July 1st, still being the date for enactment, while we are asking the legislature to postpone. We recognize that we would like to do this with more thought, more involvement. We have circulated this to the board and to staff. We would like to take what comments we get today and circulate it more widely. But the best that we'll be able to do between now and July 1st is guidance as opposed to rulemaking. So absolutely, we are still looking for that extension from the legislature so we can have more engagement. So we could look to rulemaking beyond guidance. So that's just sort of a quick preamble to sort of tell you that we are working very hard to get something done. At the same time, we're asking for a pushback. So at least we can hopefully still be on track by the end of March to get something to people to be able to predicate their spring/summer construction upon. So All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Fantastic. So what I'd like to walk you through today is just the overall, how everything's looking to tie together. You'll see we have done guidance documents before, very much starts with the purpose, authority, severability. That's generally the same in most documents. The legal standards that we have is the statutory reference. So I think the first section that I'd like to really focus in on are the definitions. Recognizing that this is still a work in progress, we need some sort of preamble for this section saying that these are for this guidance doc only and doesn't have a wider applicability. Last week, we did bring to you the road and driveway definition. We are leaving those as is for right now, but what we have done is pull in a definition of tract of land, which comes from another Act 250 rule, and try to basically take that and pull it in here as a reference, because I think there was some good discussion around what a tract of land is. I think the other thing that we tried to pull in was repairs and maintenance. We worked to try and also make sure this had a tie back to applicability within Act 250 in terms of definitions, and make sure that we're using the same sort of definitions for repairs and maintenance. We have deleted all other definitions at this point and trying to keep this as simple and straightforward as possible. So I'm just going to continue the walkthrough. We can come back to different areas. Second thing to highlight is the methodology for how to count, and try to make this as straightforward as possible, and that we're recognizing we're using the definitions, and we talked a bit about that last week, about within versus to, and the linear footage is after July 1st. And other than farming and forestry, and we're also saying if something was in existence prior to July 1st, we're saying some different tools for how we might be able to look back and evaluate if something was there. Right now, we're using the standard of so as to be drivable by a passenger vehicle, recognizing that there are various construction standards for roads and driveways, and to validate if our road was in place as of July 1st. We'll take a look at all these different sources and make a determination as to whether that road was in existence and drivable by a passenger vehicle so as to be grandfathered. I'm going to continue on. Jurisdiction considered for changes to class 4 town highways, and this is where it gets into the maintenance definition. There's a statutory carve out for municipalities maintaining class 4 highways. However, when it is an entity other than a municipal entity, such as private property owner along the class 4 road, then it can potentially be jurisdictional if it is not necessarily maintenance and repairs. So that's section 4.2 is laying that out. And then we get into the last section, which is conversion of farm or forestry roads. And we are stating that farm and forestry roads facilitate farming and forestry practices, which are exempted below 2,500 feet in elevation. And that where farm and forestry roads are used to access lands for any new development or subdivision on a parcel of land. Again, we're taking the statutory language and applying it here. That portion of the road serving the new development or subdivision shall be deemed converted. And then for converted roads, we're saying to see that section 4.1 about how to measure for whether or not it then triggers the statutory definition for construction. So we try to keep it relatively short to the point. I think what we heard from the last discussion of this was to try and keep it as plain and as easy to understand as possible. That's a tough thing to do. So happy to hear thoughts, and I'll scroll back up for the time being but I can scroll to different areas, but Brooke, that was the really quick overview. Do you wish to add anything?
No, I think you did a great job. I'll just say that we're trying to find a simple and conservative approach to asserting this jurisdiction. So those are sort of our guiding lights. We don't want to exceed any kind of authority or interpret anything that any grant of authority for jurisdiction. We don't want to be expanding that in any way. We want to make sure that we're well within the grants that we received from the statute.
Any thoughts from other board members? I apologize because I'm sharing my screen. You might actually have to speak up. I can't see all of your little boxes.
Sure, Sarah. This is Alex. I will dive in. I haven't, my thinking has not changed much since our last discussion. I still think this is not the right guidance to provide regarding the difference between a road and a driveway. I think it should be reworked to be more to be a different standard, something that more of us and more Vermonters would just understand on its face, rather than this concept of driveways being accessed within a tract and roads being accessed outside of a tract. So that hasn't changed. I won't belabor that point. I didn't notice a provision in here about when a driveway becomes a road. Is that not contemplated when you two were working through this, that could happen? And if, what are you thinking on that front?
Jump in. I don't think there's any, like, something becomes something else. Give an example of what you're talking about that,
Sure.
and yeah. That would be,
So the way this is contemplated, if I own 40 acres and I'm on a town road and I want to divide it up into 4 10-acre lots, and I put in some accesses to that, they're all going to be considered driveways, correct? Because it's not access through another property from without, it's access within that tract of land. So everything I install will be deemed a driveway. So,
Okay.
In the future, if one of those lots decides to subdivide further, let's say the zoning allows for that, and they decide to take one of those 4 new building lots and turn it into 4 building lots, but making use of some of the shared infrastructure that was installed in the first place, will some of those previously deemed driveways become roads? If you know
no.
what I'm saying?
No.
Oh.
So whatever driveway system, driveways exist, and that's only for calculation purposes. We're defining it for purposes of counting linear footage. And so the notion of, so later on, okay, they look backwards and say, have you exceeded 2,000 feet of road or driveway building on the tract of land? Because let's say somebody builds 1,999 feet of driveways on their property. They are sub-jurisdictional. Somebody else now wants to come and connect onto that. If they build 50 feet of new road on their neighbor's property, that is their 50 feet of road. But that 50 feet of road will, if the other driveways of that original tract were built after the deadline date, then we look at the whole shebang on that tract. So it's not that the driveways that exist get called something else. It is, if somebody else is building on that first person's property, we're just calling it a road for purposes of counting how much road are you building here? And if that 50 feet of road over an easement to get to their own property if that triggers the 2,000 feet on that original tract, that's how we end up jurisdictional. Now, if that neighbor that wanted to build onto the driveway network, let's say the driveway network was only 1,000 feet of driveway and he wanted to build 50 feet, he would just build a 50-foot road and he gets to his boundary and then he has the balance of 2,000 feet minus 50 feet to build on his property before it's jurisdictional. So you don't change the status of anything from a driveway to a road, but there is that look back to say, if you reach more than 2,000 on a tract of land, that's when you trigger it, even if it's not you that's building it, if you gave an easement to somebody else and they went beyond the linear footage trigger.
Yep, okay, I understand. Thanks for answering that question. So, yeah, again, I don't think this is the right differentiation, but we can talk more about that later. In the definition of maintenance and repairs, I think this is great. The only item that I had some question over was number 3, application of stone or gravel. That seems very broad to me, in a way that could apply to complete reconstruction of the road. Like surface grading and maintaining culverts and repairing from damage, and those all seem very much like maintenance to me. But just the term application of stone or gravel seems like you could potentially take a dirt path and turn it into a full-blown road and just say, well, it qualifies as maintenance because I'm simply applying stone or gravel. So I'm a little worried about that provision. Maybe it could say, application of, but I don't know what it could say. I'm just calling out it seems like very general language.
Yeah, oops.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we tried to mimic the statutory language, and which actually I think uses the terminology new stone or, can you go up just a little bit, Sarah, to the statutory part of it? Going a little bit farther. Okay, for purposes, yeah, here we go. In section Roman numeral 2. In second to last sentence, routine maintenance shall include replacing a culvert or ditch, applying new stone, grading, or making repairs after adverse weather. Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is just sort of be consistent with the notions that were expressed in that definition, which are also pretty consistent with case law in Act 250. The one thing that Sarah and I have a question about is does adding pavement. So anyway, I'm sorry. Let me preface all of this. We're trying to be consistent with the language that pertains to Class 4 road improvements or maintenance, and whether or not that triggers a non-municipal actor in terms of building a Class 4 road when the municipality is not the actor. So that's what we were trying to mimic. But one of the questions that we do have is, how do you guys feel about pavement? Should that be an improvement, or is that more of a repair or maintenance aspect? But we were just trying to stay in concert with the same idea of what happens to Class 4 with non-municipal construction.
Right. And so my concern is that on a Class 4 road that is essentially not maintained by the municipality and amounts to nothing more than a dirt path, that having this in our guidance with just the terms application of stone or gravel, someone could interpret that to mean I can take that dirt path portion of that Class 4 road and turn it into a fully functional road and call it maintenance. And I don't think that's what the statutory intent was. I think the statutory intent was, on a Class 4 road, if a non-municipal actor is making substantial improvements, then it should trigger this provision. And so when the statute says new stone and then goes on to say grading and so on, I think it's talking about adding stone or gravel, surface level to essentially replace what was already there or maintain what was already there. I don't think that means any level of stone or gravel, because then it makes this whole piece about maintenance sort of not relevant, because then any improvement to a road, as long as you're just adding stone and gravel, becomes maintenance only and not a real improvement. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, I do, Alex, but here's the thing. I mean, you're going to the intent. And the intent is only relevant if the plain language leaves some gapping hole that needs to be, what were they talking about? They didn't tell us. But for class 4 roads, they did tell us. They gave us a laundry list of what's improvements and what isn't improvements. And to me, I think you are splitting hairs. I think what we're trying to also do is just follow what the statute is saying for class 4 road improvements or maintenance, to be able to utilize that, for example, in, what happens to a conversion of a road? What do you do? What is it about a conversion of a road? So the example that you're giving about, well, gee, we want them to be able to put, maybe surface gravel down, but we don't want them digging out the subbase and reconstructing the road. But in fact, we have a list in the statute of what is not considered like maintenance or repair. And they're saying that an awful lot is maintenance and repair, except for, are you changing the location of the road? Are you changing the size? And I think the example you're giving probably goes to the size. Maybe it would go to location and layout if they were changing the physical place that it is. So to me, and then they add pavement, and they're saying pavement's an improvement, not a routine maintenance thing. So to me, it's pretty well spelled out, and we're just trying to mimic it, not change
I understand. I hope you understand where I'm coming from, but I'm not going to split hairs. I'm fine with it the way you've explained it, Brooke. I think there could be unintended consequences. I'm not that concerned about those unintended consequences. As to your question about pavement, yeah, it seems pretty clear. Pavement is not maintenance if you're adding it. Maintaining pavement is a whole different matter. I would argue there are probably 0 miles of class 4 roads that have pavement on them. So, what was your question about pavement? You had one, right?
Yeah, it was just, do we all agree? I mean, not the class 4 in the statute thing. We know it's already prescribed there, but do we all feel similarly, like if there were a farm road that were converted now for the use on, for some kind of housing or commercial development, whatever, is if you did nothing but the road, but put down stay mat, apparently that would be maintenance, at least if you were to follow something like what's in the statute. But if you were to actually pave that road, which I would argue has the exact same impervious surface effect on the environment, is that an improvement? Do we feel that way generally, that we would mimic precisely the same class 4 standard for if there were a conversion? What if all they did was pave the road? Is that a conversion with a physical action on the land, construction of improvements for development? Or are you maintaining the road?
I would say
So,
unequivocally, pavement is an improvement. It is not maintenance if you are adding new pavement to a road that is not otherwise paved. That's just me.
So, Brooke, I think just to speak to a couple of things about this draft, one of the things that we did was we took out the definition of improvement. And so I think what we are letting things lie is we're defining what maintenance or repairs are. And if they're not listed here, then you're right, they're an improvement. But we're including one, but not the other. And so I think we don't need to further refine that within the maintenance definition. I think we could include some carve outs if we believe that pavement was maintenance, but letting it lie here as is, I think gets us to that point. The other thing that I wanted to sort of note in terms of, to Alex's point, is the definition of how we're measuring. the methodology now to be drivable by a passenger vehicle. So if you had a class 4 road that was a very primitive path that you were coming in and adding new stone to, we would then take a look at that would be something that we would start to measure for the trigger of the linear feet then. So I think this gets us at the same point. I understand what your concern is, but I think the way that we're measuring is inclusive and addresses your concern. So I just want to add those couple of things. See, Kirsten has had her hand patiently raised for a while, so Kirsten.
Well, yeah, and I'm happy to let Alex continue with his questions or input and go later, but while we were talking about maintenance, I wanted to comment.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Kirsten. I had one
Okay,
final
so-
thing on the maintenance too.
Well, yeah,
go ahead,
so-
you first.
Brooke and Sarah, you had described that the definition of maintenance was intended to be consistent with the statutory language with respect to class 4 roads. But as you've just noted, that class 4 statutory definition contemplates size. And so kind of with Alex insofar as I think that maintenance and repairs, we may want to say applying new stone. Yeah, if you want to go down to the new definition of maintenance.
Right, you said that the statutory definition contemplates size, so I was just scrolling back
Right,
up. to
that
to
routine
see-
maintenance does not include changing the size of the road. So that could be, the width or the depth, the location, the alignment. So I don't see that element is reflected in this definition of maintenance and repairs. And I think that if that's the intent is to parallel the class 4 elements, then I think that those factors should be also brought into this definition. And then the other thing, like the activity rules already have the same definition of tract. I'm not sure we need to repeat it. So I have a bunch of other comments, but I don't want to cut off Alex. Yeah, and by the way, pavement, I think for purpose of this road rule, it doesn't, to my mind, make sense to say, oh, well, if an existing road that's already gravelled and the only action being taken is adding pavement to it and there's no further development activity, I think, myself, I don't think it makes sense to say, oh, well, that road's being paved, so now it counts. That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't further fragment or change clustering or, for what this statute is supposed to be doing. So I would prefer not to carry over that part of the class 4 road element that's in statute. I'm not quite sure why they did that, but so since you asked about the pavement specifically, that's my view on it. And I'd be fine with calling that out and saying, only paving which I know, sometimes includes some surface graveling and grading to prepare the road surface for the paving activity. To me, as you mentioned, Brooke, it doesn't change impervious. Just so. Yeah, Alex, do you want to continue with your questions?
Just
Or-
one last one on maintenance. Two questions. So one, this reads that maintenance and repairs means one or more of the following, which I would take to mean that if another example comes up of something that someone wants to say is maintenance, the answer would be no. It has to be in this. This is an exhaustive list. So my question is, does it make sense to reword this guidance and this list to say that to create an opening for something we haven't thought of? Or do you feel like this is the appropriate exhaustive list?
I don't think we need an exhaustive list. I think this is sufficient. It's guidance. I don't think it in any way precludes unanticipated factual scenarios like new technologies, or I don't know. I
Well,
mean,
it says means
yeah,
one
we
or
could
more of
put
the following,
include,
so I thought that was,
includes, sure, we could put includes, but it's not limited to, sure. I'm not so worried. It's just a guidance document, not like a rule, so, but yeah, we can do that, sure.
okay, well, whatever you think is appropriate. I think it's not just our program, any program latches on to whatever guidance they can get their hands on, and then it becomes gospel. So
Sure.
if we want it to be more inclusive, we ought to do that from the start. And then finally, on number 5, it says repair or restoration following major storm events. I don't think we want to get into quibbling with people over whether a storm event was major or not. It should just say storm events.
Yeah, they say making repairs after adverse weather.
Sure, we could use that term too. I don't really care. I mean, the idea is the
Yeah.
same. I just don't think we want to ask people to qualify what level of adverse weather.
Sure. Why don't we just change it to what the statute has, Sarah? Making repairs after adverse weather.
All right. Anything else under definitions? I think the one thing that I just do want to highlight is I understand Alice's concern with the definitions of road and driveway. However, I think what was helpful that I'd like to point out for myself was when we went back to the statutory definitions and it said to or within a tract of land. I think that was something that, again, the language is not perfect here, but we are trying to speak the same existing Act 250 language, the same statutory language, and not introduce yet another language to this concept. So understood, Alex, and we'll continue to ruminate on it and see if there's something, as I said, this has gone out to our internal staff, including legal, and yourselves. And so hopefully you've asked for comments from staff as well as from the board over the next week, before we release this more widely for comments. And hopefully we can continue to hone in on these definitions. I'd like to move on and get board comments about the methodology for counting linear feet of construction, and if there are any comments on that.
Yeah, I just want to mention that I was specifically asked if we're counting linear feet, or is somebody showing us, a survey where, you're measuring distances on a flat piece of paper. So that question was specifically asked of me about our work on the road rule. And my understanding is if you're going up a hill and down a hill, you are creating more linear feet than you would see on a piece of paper survey. Is that not the situation that we're encountering here?
That is.
So
I just wanted to be sure that's what we understand that we are talking about, and that is what we're doing.
Do you want me to jump in?
yeah, sorry, it said Kirsten. Apologies.
Yeah,
in the large room.
I am not sure. I'll have to contemplate the words like linear footage, but I think for purpose of this guidance and just practicality, I think it should be plan view, that we shouldn't try to prescribe and, put people through this difficult exercise of determining this slightly increased length that would result from the non-plan view measurement. I think that would be difficult and not make any sense. So I would just take the plan view. That'd be my recommendation. So yeah, I have some comments about this. If you're ready for that.
Kirsten, before you
Oh.
move on to that, I have a question back for you.
Sure.
As, having your former hat and also with your engineer training is plan views absolutely where they exist are wonderful. But I think what this methodology is going to give guidance to our coordinators for after July 1st, how to measure what was there and if it triggered, or if it's there and existing. So in areas where you don't have a plan view, how do you establish equity?
Well, I think it's got to be measured one way or another. And you do that on a plan, and you wouldn't want to have people drawing up, driveway and road profiles to determine that length. So you can do that, and we could, if if the board wants to specify different ways that a measurement could occur, zoomed into a certain scale on like the ANR Atlas or that kind of thing. I mean, I think we would want to be expansive in terms of what kinds of measurements we would accept as part of, review of whether or not Act 250 applies. So I'd be happy to put some more thought into that and give you some other suggested verbiage that might get at this a little bit more clearly and simply. If you want to put a pin in it, I think that will be important. I don't think that means that people have to have site plans and surveys drawn up, to scale by an engineer, that kind of thing. I think there's other ways to do it. And it could be that in some cases people want to take a measuring wheel out in the field, and that would be fine too. So yeah, I have some comments on this section if we're ready for that.
Sure.
Okay, so I guess the part that I'm a little hung up on is the like drivable by a passenger vehicle. And then the other thing is where it says the district coordinator will consult available evidence, including but not limited to the following. The way I read that is that the coordinator has to consult all of the following. And I think that's too expansive. I think that it should be more flexible for interested parties to make available different types of information for consideration, and that it can consist of this big list. And I like the list. I think it's a great start. But yeah, and I don't want to prescribe that coordinators in all cases, for instance, have to do a site visit. Online mapping, I don't know if we want to use the word software. But I think that's a good list. You might want to use the word affidavit. Testimony would be something that would occur at a hearing or some kind of warned meeting. Brooke, maybe help me out here, but in my mind, it would be more like a written affidavit or a statement, signed sworn statement.
Yeah, the bottom one kind of covers that, but you could add affidavit or sworn statement.
Yeah. So the thing that I think that we haven't figured out with this is that roads used primarily for agriculture and logging forestry are excluded, right? Like they don't count. And so we haven't put forward what's meant by primarily. it obviously contemplates that there can be something more than just farming, logging, forestry that could be served by a particular road or driveway. And I think that it's important that we make known what that is. Because if someone for the conversion piece, if someone converts such a road that's perhaps only for farming and logging forestry to another use, it may be that the new use is still primarily for, like, even when the new use is added, that the road in question is still primarily for farming or logging forestry, whereby it doesn't trigger jurisdiction.
So
So
can
I-
you put a pin in that for the next, that's 2 more sections from now, so just put a pin in farming and forestry.
Okay, primarily, yeah, the topic of defining primarily. Yeah, I guess, yeah, the drivable piece, to me, the way this is structured is it's trying to use that as a tool to determine if a road is or was in existence at a point in time. And I think that that's, as time passes, I mean, that may be something useful to occur now as part of a site visit during the early implementation of this new rule, but 5 or 10 years from now, I'm not sure the usefulness of going out and trying to see if something is passable in a vehicle. I understand the practicality of it for the near term, but I question putting in the guidance in this way.
Understood, and I think that's part of what I'll echo Brooke had said, this is just guidance. And we are asking for more time to do a rule, which could then last on in a longer term fashion. But for the sake of July 1st being rather soon, having some standard where if we need to make a determination as to whether or not a road existed in June and it's August, is we can at least hopefully use a reasonable person's interpretation.
Yeah, I'm more comfortable with the other bulleted things. Like, how do you, I mean, I guess you can make a written statement about drivability, or maybe someone makes a video of themselves driving along a road. I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but maybe if others really like it, maybe that's something we retain. I think I have some other comments about some of the other sections if we're ready.
We're still on the methodology for counting
Okay.
linear feet of road.
Yep.
I like Kirsten. I like the bullets. I think I agree with Kirsten that the wording just should be tweaked so that district coordinators can consult any of the following, including but not limited to, something like that. So it's not that they have to do a site visit, that they have to review municipal highway maps for every single case. So just clarifying that with a little language tweak in the opening sentence, I think is a good idea. I also like her idea about getting rid of the word software in the second bullet and swapping out testimony in the last bullet for, affidavit or statement, whatever. So I think those are good minor changes. I do actually like the passenger vehicle standard for the reason that Sarah mentioned, that people are going to be building roads this summer, and on July 1st, somebody's got to make an assessment of whether that road existed or not. And being able to drive a passenger vehicle seems like a reasonable, straightforward standard, except that I think we need a definition of passenger vehicle. I just did some quick Google searching on what the definition of that is, and I see some congruence amongst various definitions, but I think it might be helpful to just put it in this guidance document by passenger vehicle means the following, because we obviously don't want that to be, an ATV or some other, souped up vehicle that can make it over, mountains of rock that, a regular vehicle couldn't. Because, the intent is clear. I just think we ought to cross that T about what we mean by passenger vehicle. That's all I had on this section.
Maybe add the word typical passenger vehicle? I don't know.
I think it's, Brooke and I were going for, it's in, federal law, I think it's in 49 CFR. So Brooke, you and I can sort of flush out, maybe you see passenger vehicle as federally defined, or,
I think Title 23 probably defines it. I think passenger vehicles used in Vermont law, but we can get a definition or a description of that, sure.
anything else under methodology? All right, we'll move into class 4 roads.
Let me ask, Alex, did you express an opinion about linear footage versus on a plan?
I didn't, and I'm happy to go with whatever others feel is appropriate. It's kind of difficult, and I think linear feet makes sense to me, but it makes most sense when the road exists and you can measure it, right? Put your wheel on it, put a tape on it, whatever. And, when it's a perspective thing, where an applicant walks into our district coordinator's office and said, I would like to construct this. Here's my aerial photo. This is the path of the road I intend to build. It's way more difficult to then, ascertain the actual linear feet. And that's when a plan view, as Kirsten mentioned, is way more accommodating and I think makes more sense. But teasing that out is a pain in the rear end in a document like this. So yeah, I don't have much more to say than that.
Okay. So class 4, town highway. This again is just fairly simple of if it's maintenance performed by a municipality, it doesn't count. If it's improvements, not maintenance or repairs by a person other than a municipality, then it's potentially jurisdictional and counts towards that. Is everybody okay with class 4 roads as we've clarified it here? Kirsten, did you have something on this section?
Well, it's just that you're saying in both places that maintenance doesn't count, so I don't know that you need to say it once for the work that would be undertaken by municipalities and once for others. I think you could just state it in one sentence. Like for everyone, right? If you're just doing maintenance on a class 4 road, it doesn't matter if you're the town or it doesn't matter if you're a private entity, it doesn't count. But that's just kind of like a little bit of a.
Well, here we say maintenance and improvements, so that's different. And now.
Oh, that's
down here we
true.
say
Yeah,
maintenance
thank you.
repairs.
Thank you. Yeah,
And
that's
it
good.
gets-
Sorry.
And it kind of gives some context. I mean, it's like you can read the statute, but just to remind people that if towns are working on them, that doesn't matter.
Alex, did you have any thoughts?
Nope, nothing to add.
All right, we'll get into the last little piece, and we have about 7 more minutes to discuss perhaps which is the most embroiled part of this, which is the conversion of our farm or forestry roads. And so the first part is talking to what a farm or forestry road is, and that they are exempt from jurisdiction, unless there is something that occurs that then converts them. And so Brooke and I spent a lot of time going over conversion, the word primarily, and just try to keep this as simple as possible and say, and go back to the statutory definition, say, where farm and forestry roads are used to access land for, and this is the statutory wording, any new development or subdivision on a parcel of land. The portion of the road serving the new development or subdivision shall be deemed converted. So if you have 1,000 feet of farm road and the first 1,000 feet then serves a new development, that first 1,000 feet of farm road is converted, but the remainder of it is not. And again, I think Kirsten, you and I were talking about different, drawing this out and things of that nature, and this is absolutely an area that could benefit from that. But again, in terms of what we're putting forth in guidance and trying to be as simple and plain spoken as possible, this is the best that we could muster. Thoughts? Kirsten?
Okay, so in the first paragraph, the wording, for the purpose of facilitating farming and forestry practices. And I don't mean to be too picky here, but I don't really like the word facilitating, and I don't know why we're saying practices. I mean, it's just the use of the land for farming and forestry. I would just say for the purpose of farming and forestry. Like it's just an element of those land uses. Yeah, that's just, and then the second sentence, and again, I don't mean to sound too picky, but like, I don't like that sentence at all. I would just strike it. I don't think it's sort of purports a purpose that I think there's more to it than this. And I think, the regulation of logging above 2,500 feet, for instance, I believe that it has in part to do with those higher elevation lands are more fragile. Like, I just don't think we need to say this sentence at all. I don't see how it serves a purpose. And I don't think we should include it. I would recommend that we strike the whole sentence.
It's fine. I don't have any problem with
Understood. I
it.
think that was, I think that was added as an attempt. There's been so much misinformation, unfortunately, that's been perpetuated around this. And
Yes.
Some fears that have been perpetuated too. Is just a reminder that farming and forestry are exempted. And so as long as these continue, they will continue to be exempted. It's really when you talk about subdivisions and development and how it converts. So Alex, do you think we should take out the second sentence too?
You do. Yep. You can collapse the two paragraphs then and just make it one paragraph with all of 3 sentences.
So
Yeah.
in the second paragraph, and I know we've put a pin in the topic of primarily, but for instance, at the end of the second sentence, where farm and forest roads are used to access lands for any new development or subdivision on a parcel of land, the portion of road serving the new development or subdivision shall be deemed converted, comma, and this is just conceptual, comma, when such converted road is not primarily for farming or logging or forestry, sorry. Like, right, we need to add that qualifier there as well, when we
Well,
figure out primarily.
What we're trying to do, Kirsten, is like just make it a lot simpler and just ignoring pretty much this primarily. I mean, what we're saying is I see what you're saying, but it's not a qualifier. It's like, it is what it is. When a farm or forest road is used as the access way for a new development or a new subdivision, it's converted. It's no longer the farm road. So we could say is no longer primarily used or no longer deemed being used primarily for farming or forestry, and the portion of road serving the new development shall be deemed converted. We could do that. We were trying to not get into this primarily used for conundrum and just say, look, if you're driving on the road to get to your subdivision, it's a converted road. We kind of skipped over this primarily used for thing to just say it's converted when that happens. But I appreciate it. If we shouldn't
Well, I
leave that
wish-
as an orphan, we can address it.
Yeah, I feel like,
Alex,
go
do you
ahead.
have
Sorry,
some
Al.
thoughts? Hold that thought for a minute, Kirsten. Alex?
Yeah, so sorry, this is related, but a little different. What happens when a farmer has a farm road that exists and they do a subdivision to divide the farm, but there's no new development proposed. It's just like an intergenerational family subdivision. The property that's being subdivided, it will continue to be farmed. This would seem to say that in that case, it becomes a converted farm road, even if it's still going to be used primarily for farming. So that wasn't your intent, right? That's just my finding a weird example that doesn't really work.
No, that's not, no. It would be converted. See, and the other
But
thing that
it's-
you guys need to be aware of is, so what we tried to do is figure out on conversion of farm roads. There's conversion of the road, which the way that we've sort of looked at this, and it's taken a lot of thought. But is it a one-step process that we're talking about or a two-step process? And I think the way that we're laying it out with what is conversion of a road means that it's no longer primarily used for that other purpose. Now, because it's no longer just a farm and forestry road, it's being used to access the development or the subdivision, because we're talking about putting different traffic on that road. So the conversion the way that we've thought about this and laid it out is, okay, so it's no longer a farm or forestry road. It's just a road. It's a private road. Okay. But the next step of the analysis is then did something happen to the road that turned it into development of improvements? And so while the status of that farm road, it's no longer primarily for farming. Now it's just a road. But if you don't touch that road, even though you're using it to access the development, it's not subject to the application of this section because you didn't build 800 feet of road or 2,000 feet of road and driveway. So that's complicated sounding, but what it means is there's two steps to this. Are you or are you not a farm or logging road? That's question number one. Let's say you're no longer that because you're not being primarily used or only used or however we're interpreting what primarily means. But then the second step is, and there been so many improvements to that such that it's construction of improvements triggering jurisdiction, and we need to be adding linear footage starting here, even though it used to be a farm road. You follow me on that?
I get the concept, Brooke, of the two-step test, but what I'm saying is that I'm trying to give an example of where the first step doesn't work. If a farmer is subdividing their 300 acres and they're going to use the same farm road for the future, but they did do a subdivision, the use of the road isn't changing. It's still primarily for farming. There's no new development proposed along it. I don't know that should trigger the first step of deeming it converted. I think
but
that
is he
for it to
doing
be
anything to
converted,
the
it
road?
needs to be used for something other than primarily farming and forestry use.
Well, then it comes down to, we got to debate what does primarily mean. Because basically what we're saying is if this is now a road that you're using to get to your subdivision homes, it's been converted. Now, if you
I know,
don't
but you're
do
not hearing me.
anything,
I'm not talking about homes. I'm talking about agricultural subdivisions that don't create homes, simply create new lots for farmers to pass down their property to their 3 kids because
Okay,
there's 3 of
so-
them.
then that's
I think
not part of this at all.
I think Alex, well, a couple things. First, we're at time, just to keep us on track. Second thing is, Alex, I hear you, and I think what I'm hearing from you in Houston is both without the definition of primarily, this is a potential gap that we have. And I think we try to keep it simple, but I think that's maybe something to continue to evaluate is that because I think in the scenario that Alex just gave, the whole thing is still primarily used for farming and would be able to qualify as not being converted. So I think that we have some more tweaks to make to this. Absolutely happy to continue to hear from the board and from staff. We're hopefully going to talk about this again next week and make some improvements between now and then. So I'm going to stop sharing this for the time being. And just any last thoughts, Brooke, before we move on to the next agenda item?
I just want to reiterate, and this is not just for the board, but for a public as well, that farm and logging roads don't come under this road construction jurisdiction trigger. If a farmer decides to build roads to farm all sorts of different sections of his property or whatever, that is not anything jurisdictional under the road construction jurisdiction trigger. So we need to keep that in mind and be very clear because we don't want folks to be confused.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brooke. Kirsten, are you ready to make a motion or do you have something else before we move on to the next agenda item?
I'm not ready to make a motion. I have
Okay.
something else. So on our road construction jurisdiction Act 181 tab, we are making known that there will be a public comment period. It was actually scheduled to occur last month, that we were targeting to adopt something by the end of this month. And I'm just wondering, are Sarah, you and Brooke planning to implement like a public comment? Can we refine this further before that would occur? Like how's that kind of shaping up?
So I apologize. I think what I tried to articulate was what our sense of timing is on this is this week. We're looking to get comments from board and staff to bring back to you for next week and then open it up more to the public. But I think what Brooke and I have both recognized is we have a double-edged sword here. We're trying to move as quickly as possible, recognizing that people want to have guidance in place for July 1st in the construction season. We also recognize how important it is to have public comment, which is why we've asked for the legislature to extend this. So we will absolutely endeavor to have public comment as much as we are able to facilitate if we do have to pursue having this in place for July 1st, but still also meeting the deadline of having something to the board for potential adoption by the end of March. So two different things to satisfy here is trying to have something quick and also facilitate public input. We're not going to do either well. So I think it is our intent to get public comment after this next draft more widely, but recognizing also with the timing that we have to operate under, unless the legislature gives us an extension, we're not going to be able to be very inclusive of broader public input. Is that fair, Brooke?
Oh, yeah, no, I was just confirming. And speaking of public comment, there's a hand up, maybe you've noticed.
Understood.
Yeah.
I just wanted to recognize any board members before we move on to this and recognize that we are at time. We do have a public comment. Is that Neil Ryan?
It is. Thank you for listening. I've been listening in for the last hour. Just something really quick based on what Alex was talking about. Two real world examples that come to mind. Our farm is on a 4th class road, or it's off a 4th class road. The town gave us and adjacent landowners the opportunity to improve that road, not to class 3 standards, but improve it this summer, where they were willing to widen it, ditch, but the landowners would pay for the stone. Now, as I've just heard this defined, that would mean that to get up to any of those parcels, you're like, that was 2,600 feet of road we improved. So it sounds to me that before you even get to your land, you've triggered the 800-foot rule under that scenario. Go ahead, Brooke.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you is that the town is improving, making the big changes to their own class 4 road. They can do anything, including improvements under the statute. Has nothing to do with triggering the jurisdictional trigger because they are the municipality. And if you are merely paying for or adding the gravel that we were earlier discussing about surface gravel. That is a maintenance aspect of it. So, and maybe you're paying for it. Yeah, might even be an argument that you're not doing it yourself, but even so, that would be clearly in the maintenance category. So there would be absolutely no jurisdictional trigger that would pertain to you guys, so long as it's the town doing the actual road construction improvements. So
Okay.
I would not worry under that scenario. Because I don't think, because the town is not an actor that's subject to this rule.
Okay, so if it's the town's excavator, it was their excavator, it was our plan that they operationalized. So had it been our excavator, we're out of luck, but if the town was willing to bring theirs up, we were good?
So Neil, I think it's Sarah, just for the sake of, I'd love to get from you what your questions are, and then maybe we can respond. So you said
Okay.
you had a second question too.
Yep, second one is another real world example. Jim Bulger already subdivided 2 lots on his farm for his children. He has gone up there and bush hogged those lots for about 30 years. It is a 2-road track that he takes his tractor up and down. This notion of passenger vehicle, it sounds like what you're saying is that road that has been there for probably 200 years, 1,200 feet up past his house, which he's only used a tractor in the last 30 years. It's not passable but with a passenger vehicle currently. So it sounds like July 1st, he would trigger Act 250 to actually improve that road. Another example, I have 5 miles of roads on my farm. Many of them have not been maintained to a condition where you'd take a passenger vehicle on them, but they're, some of them are ancient roads, some of them are old interior farm roads. It sounds like if I wanted to improve that road to save 15 minutes to get to the general store, I'd also be triggering Act 250. Those roads.
So I think some of the things I want to just very clearly state, and I appreciate, so first of all, I so appreciate you keying in, listening to us for an hour and listening to the debate here, because there's a lot that we're sort of working on, and you can understand how complex some of these issues are and how we're trying to get through them. And so hopefully that's something you can take away from this. I just want to caution that as a board, we have to be careful about jurisdictional opinions, because we're not district coordinators. And when you get real life situations, we don't want to impede the good work that our district coordinators do in terms of deciding one jurisdiction and whatnot. So I don't want necessarily the board to specifically respond to these very specific instances. But what I can say is duly noted. I think these are great things for us to consider as we move forward. And we are absolutely listening, and we are going to be considering this next Monday too in a different draft. So appreciate your thoughts. If you have the ability to shoot us an email to Act 250 board@vermont.gov, please absolutely do so, and have your neighbor do as well. I think we are trying to listen, we are trying to respond, and we are planning on a larger public involvement. So
yeah, suffice to say that every large parcel in Vermont has existing roads. The vast majority of them, you wouldn't take a Toyota Corolla through right now, but those roads have been there and utilized from horse and buggy onward.
absolutely, Neil. And in my youth, I think I did take what was the equivalent of a Toyota Corolla on some of them, bottomed out, but had a lot of fun. Brooke, I don't know if you have any last thoughts on some of this.
I just want to thank Neil. This is exactly what we need. We need these factual scenarios thrown at us. But I do appreciate Sarah keeping us in check in terms of, giving you answers to factual scenarios, because we do have to rely on our coordinators. And we're in that process of trying to figure out how do we guide those decisions to be consistent, and having the factual scenarios to work through is the only way that we can ensure that what we're trying to accomplish here by effectuating this statutory language, it's going to work. That's what we're trying for. So thank you so much for your time on this. Really appreciate and would love to continue to engage. Please email us so that we can use your thoughts and experience to try to figure this out.
Thank you.
All right, anything more on any of this before we head into executive session? And I just will say that once you go into executive session, I'm going to stay out until you call me in, as I'm going to recuse myself from one of the matters. So if you would like to consider making a motion. Brooke.
So the board needs to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals and enforcement actions and other matters that require attorney-client communications. Therefore, I move that we find the premature public knowledge of these matters would place the board at a substantial disadvantage and ask that the board enter executive session.
Understood. Kirsten.
I'll second, but did someone have something else they were?
All right. I think all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 I'm going to leave you to, I think Maddie's going to continue to run the meeting and Jenny will facilitate the executive session.
And we'll call you
So
in
I'll-
after we get through the first item.
Yep. Thanks. Bye.